it will not mean much to the man in the street because it's very much a Yorkshire thing, but rugby league. And my local rugby league team that I used to support when I was a boy. And the biggest game I can remember was the 1965 Rugby League Cup final where my local team went and played Wigan. So this is about a crowd of guys that go down to Wembley from the north. And it's a weekend to see the game. Downstairs in the Angel, on this one particular Saturday morning in '65, in this well-known Soho hostelry, Gabby, the genial landlady, was working behind the bar alongside her 3 supplementary staff, who had been commandeered in anticipation of the annual invasion of the blokes from up north, who were valiantly trying to cope with the sudden influx of rugby league aficionados, who, even though it was just 10 a.m, which is at least 1 hour before the cock usually crows around these parts, were quaffing their pints of Tetley's bitter like there was no tomorrow. The pub was chock-a-block with supporters of both Challenge Cup finalists, who were, so I gathered, the fierce historical rivals who went by the names of Hunslet and Wigan, who were well and truly up for cup, so to speak. Yet, commendably, a convivial atmosphere was prevailing between the two persuasions, which bear no resemblance whatsoever to the hordes who followed the team of the round ball game. Indeed not. These guys are in a different league to that lot they are. They can sup 10 pints stood on their heads, they can. Flat hats, hands like shovels, and physiques like gable ends abound. Yet the banter between the two tribes was a delight to behold. Granted, to the southern ear, this northern patois could perhaps be a little hard to decipher, yet their jocularity was infectious. On these annual Rugby League jamborees, the monetary contribution to the West End's economy ensured that these hordes were always welcomed with open arms. Nick the Greek, the notorious local mover and shaker, and his counterparts who cater for all comers in this neck of the woods, particularly enjoyed the unadulterated free-spending earthiness of these northerners, who've come to pay homage to the game they love. The proper game is how they describe it, which they explain is no way related to the carryings on the likes of Twickenham by the Pinstripe Brigade. Heaven forbid. As an aside, I once overheard a couple of men politely explaining to a few inquisitive southerners the rudimentary difference between the two codes, and came up with an interesting observation, as he pointed out a subtle yet significant difference between the Rugby League and the Union's playing strip, which was eloquently explained the fact that the Union players' shorts are tailored with pockets which to house their handkerchiefs, whilst the League Lakers' shorts have no pockets. But with no time for such nicety, have always preferred to wipe their noses on the sleeves and just get on with the game in the way they've been brought up to do. Yet strangely, these self-same blokes, who to the uninitiated look as though they could eat their grannies, are supporters of the highest calibre, who would applaud a great move or a try from whatever side of the fence it happened to come from. Admittingly, a little less fervently if by the other side, yet even so, credit where credit's due, they must certainly do. These mostly working-class virtues, I'm pleased to say, still prevail to this very day. Suffice to say, all is now well at the Angel. The place has been well and truly jumping, and the till bell ringing at a more than steady rate of knocks, ever since the minute the doors were first opened for business. Like a bloody avalanche it was, said Gabby. Then almost abruptly the bar began to thin out, as the kick-off time was rapidly approaching. 1 hour to lift off. Best be on our way, I heard one of them roar. Well, never have I seen so many pints gulped down so quickly, before the en masse made their way away, after which it was all hands on deck in tidying up the disarray of the northerners had left in their wake, as they jovially made their way to the Wembley way. Once the chores had been and done, the sense of relief was tangible, as Gabby and her crew sat having their ciggies all round, discussing the merits or otherwise of the horse from the Northern Hemisphere. Sally, the part-timer, joked, "They're almost like us in many ways, don't you think?" At which Gabby piped up, "They're all right, I suppose, but you wouldn't want one of them marrying your daughter, would you?" They all laughed non-committingly as they enjoyed their little break. Yet they were fully aware that this was just the calm before the storm, because in roughly 2 hours' time, experience tells them that the whole rigmarole will recommence in even more earnest than the first time round. This will be the real deal. The victorious will drink to celebrate, whilst the less fortunate will drink to drown their sorrows. After a reasonable period of contemplative analysis, the also-rans would join in with the revelry by shaking hands with the lucky sods that had beaten them. Yet each and every one of them were unanimously agreeing that it had been a bloody good game. As the day turned into night, the Angel had become a veritable scrummage of tightly fueled, like-minded, culturally entwined, backslapping blokes who were having a bloody good time with Nobsong. Whilst this was going on, a few of the regular men about town happened to pop their heads through the door, whereupon they more often than not thought better of it and ventured on to tamer pastures. Winners or losers, the business in the West End will always be winners tonight. The streets will be alive to North Country banter. "How much? You must be bloody joking. I can buy a house in Barnsley for that." Peggy, a regular customer of long standing of 40 years or more, boasts that she's still got 7.5 teeth left in her head. She loves it when the Northerners are back in town and joins in with the banter wholeheartedly. For instance, after overhearing the blokes remarking about the prices quoted by the girls who ply their trade around here were at least £2 dearer than they were last time they're down here, lets her loudly retorting, "I'm open to negotiation, you know, with special discounts for group bookings," which brought forth guffaws galore. They loved her, they did. Her cackling and laughter could be plainly heard, head and shoulders above the by-gummers of the now heaving clientele. "They're not bad lads, these Northerners, are they?" she shouted to Gabby. "They're certainly not," she hollered back, as she was quickly perusing the till roll she was in the process of replacing with a most satisfactory demeanour. Local entrepreneur Nick the Greek just happened to be craven-like socialising with the supporters when Gabby shouted, "Time, gentlemen, please," at which it unsurprisingly transpired that Nick the Greek had persuaded his newly discovered blood brothers to en masse join him in sampling the delights of the Blue Heaven nightclub, which was handily situated just round the corner in Brewer Street, the proprietor of which is Corfu Andrew, who just happens to be Nick's brother. The Greeks run a lot of things round these parts. Nick had spent the last half hour or so regaling the ear of one ample-sized bloke, who he rightly presumed to be the self-leader of the pack, who went by the name of Bert, personally assuring him that the girls in the Blue Heaven, with a leery wink, are the best in the business. "Say no more, know what I mean?" "Sounds all right to me," bellows Bert. Nick's judgment was spot on. Bert just happened to be the chairman of the Hunslet Supporters Club, and wherever Bert leads them, his colleagues unquestionably tend to follow, knowing full well that wherever they end up, they just take it for granted there'll always be Tetleys on tap. At the Angel's closing time, the two previous opposing tribes were now snaking their way up towards the tantalising nocturnal delights of the Blue Heaven and the girls from many lands. Noticeably, the general banter was still predominantly concerning the merits or otherwise of the afternoon's match, which was the purpose of this whole exercise, and the Wembley final, and the losing side's opinion of the blatantly unsuitability of that prat of a referee. Otherwise, as the night wore on, it was only the colour of the rosettes and scarves that gave their game away. Yet apart from that, you could hardly tell one from t'other. The Blue Heaven turned out to be more than an acceptable establishment, as Corfu Andrew, le patron, had wisely taken the advice of his brother and borrowed a couple of barrels of Tetley's best bitter from Gabby, who helped to keep the blokes on familiar ground, so to speak, which in retrospect Nick and Andrew had realised the slight error in their ways, because it very quickly became obvious that due to the Northerners' avaricious thirst for this particular brew, they should have borrowed 4 barrels at least. However, when the 2 barrels prematurely ran dry, the blokes understandably carried on with their house bottles of Carlsberg Special Brew, which they surprisingly bore with great fortitude. The Eastern European beauties that adorned the blue heaven tried their level best to lure them astray by gyrating their limbs accordingly. They even smoothed down the odd head of brill-creamed hair, which to be fair did procure the odd one or two to leave the scrum and fondly pat the odd arse or two before returning to the more important issues of the day, such as the scandalous price of pigeon corn and the mating rituals of the ferret. The girls were now writhing on their poles even more suggestively than is normally the case, which did attract the occasional furtive glance or two, but the unmistakable general consensus of opinion was that they were all right, but no tits, no meat on them, no to get hold of, if you know what I mean. Corfu Andrew, on hearing some of these disparaging remarks, swore blind that the next year he would hire 2 female tug-of-war teams, sighing perhaps that will get him going. Bert, our overtly gregarious leader, with the build of a gable end and an appetite to match, was now suffering with severe hunger pangs, which had finally got the better of him. He could take no more. Something had to be done, it did. On his way to the loo, he furtively slipped out the door to peruse the wall-mounted menu of the Angus Steakhouse next door, which he fleetingly couldn't help but notice on his way into the blue heaven, which had lodged in his head from that moment to this, which true enough read exactly as he recalled. Yet it was the sign on the door that said, "Open 24 hours," which clinched the deal for him. Once he brought the news to his colleagues that you can acquire a T-bone steak with all the trimmings at this time of the day, which was 4 a.m, whereupon the lure of the scantily clad ladies of the night seemed to reign even more, especially when Bert added that the steakhouse had even got Tetley's on tap. The girls tried their level best in trying to get them to linger a little longer, but it couldn't stop the blue heaven from emptying with almost indecent haste. The thought of those T-bones and Tetley's now back on tap seemed to give them a whole new lease of life. The revelry carried on well into the dawn of the new day. You'd have to go a long way to see such a happy bunch of blokes as these. The Strand Palace Hotel unslept in, suitcases unopened, and almost time to hit the road. The thought of which brought a knowing smile to Bert's face as he rose to his feet and shouted, "Time, gentlemen, please," in no uncertain terms, which instantly had the desired effect. After all, they had only 2 hours to get back to the hotel and be at Victoria Coach Station. After they had all supped up, it was handshakes all round. Then the Wigan blokes turned left and the Hunslet blokes turned right, after all agreeing that it had been a bloody good game indeed, with surprisingly few mishaps along the way. On their arrival at the coach station, there was indeed 2 Wallace Arnold shadows waiting for them, and coincidentally, in the very next bay in wait, 2 Wigan Greyway shadows, which within half an hour or so would whisk them back to where they'd come from, full to the gunnels with very happy blokes indeed. Meanwhile, most of the Wallace Arnold clients slept all the way home, as the shadow cruised its way up to the motorway, back to the Northern Hemisphere and the comfort of the Rhubarb Triangle in God's own county. Proper people they are up there. And the women have got a bit of meat on them. And Hunslet are at home to Leeds next week. Sweet dreams, indeed. A weekend away for the game.